We own both schools, by the way, not one, two. We own 4 buildings. We own the block. Name somebody else in the Black conscious community who bought a whole block. Nobody. I'm the only one.
Do you see me laughing, my nigga?
You know that 2016 to 2026 comparison people keep making where nothing looks the way it was supposed to? Yeah, this is one of those situations. Because if someone told you we're almost there in 2016 and they're still saying it in 2026, that's not hope. That's a cycle.
So that was a lie.
And when I line that up with what Dr. Umar Johnson has been saying over the years, nah, that contrast got uncomfortable real quick. Urgency doesn't last 10 years. Promises don't age that well. So today, I'm not breaking down numbers or paperwork. I'm breaking down what happens when a decade passes and the story never changes. The first thing that happens when you line up 2016 next to 2026, your brain glitches a little because 2016 doesn't feel that long ago. 10 years sounds abstract until you put the words side by side. Then suddenly it's not abstract at all. It's a mirror. I'm not even talking about outcomes yet, just the sound of the language, the tone, the urgency. Stuff that felt charged in 2016 felt like movement, momentum, pressure. In 2026, it lands different. It's not wrong, it's not illegal, it's just older. And that's the uncomfortable part, because time doesn't accuse you, it just shows you what stayed the same. Once you notice that shift, you can't unhear it. Everything else starts sounding recycled. Let's be real, we're almost there is one of the most powerful phrases ever. It doesn't promise a date, it doesn't lock you into specifics, but it keeps people leaning forward. In year 1, that phrase is fuel. It tells people don't leave yet. In year 2 or 3, it still works because progress is supposed to be messy. People expect delays, and leaders know this. Movements are built on anticipation, not delivery. Anticipation keeps donations, attention, loyalty flowing. The problem isn't the phrase. The problem is how long the phrase stays in rotation, because language designed for the beginning was never meant to carry a decade. Every phrase has a shelf life, motivation included. There's a point where encouragement stops energizing and starts buffering. Same words, same tone, different year. What used to sound like leadership starts sounding like delay management, and nobody wants to admit that, because admitting it means admitting time passed without the shift you were promised. So instead of updating the language, people defend it. That's when motivation expires. Not because it was fake, but because it outlived its purpose. Here's where things get sneaky. Nobody ever announces that accountability is gone. It just fades. Early on, accountability sounds like updates, milestones, deadlines. Next year, we should be here. But as time stretches, those checkpoints disappear.
How, Sway?
Not all at once, slowly, politely, quietly. Suddenly, the conversation isn't about when anymore. It's about why it's complicated. Context replaces clarity, and context is slippery because context can always be expanded. There's always another reason, another obstacle, another enemy. So instead of answering the calendar, leaders end up debating circumstances. That's how time becomes the shield. Not lies, not deception, just delay. There's a moment every long-running movement hits. You can hear it in the language. Early years sound like building, plans, vision, what's coming next. Later years start sounding like defense, explanations, pushback. They're trying to stop us. Progress talk is forward-facing. Survival talk is reactive. And once survival becomes the main theme, everything changes. Criticism isn't feedback anymore. It's an attack. Questions aren't curiosity. They're sabotage. The mission quietly shifts from creating something new to protecting what already exists. That's a huge tell, because real progress invites questions. Stagnation needs enemies. Let's talk incentives, because time doesn't hit everyone the same. For supporters, long timelines cost hope, energy, patience. For leaders, long timelines can actually be comfortable. The longer something takes, the harder it is for people to walk away. That's sunk cost. Not just money, identity. People don't just support projects. They support stories they're part of. And after 10 years, leaving doesn't feel neutral. It feels like admitting something painful. So the longer the timeline stretches, the more loyalty gets locked in. Not because things are working, but because people don't want 10 years to mean nothing. There's a difference between consistency and repetition, and time is what exposes which one you're dealing with. Consistency means the message evolves as reality evolves. Repetition means the message stays the same because reality did not. When you hear the exact same explanations in year 8 that you heard in year 2, something is off.
You're showing me how unserious you are.
At first, people mistake frozen narratives for stability. They think, at least the vision hasn't changed. But that's backwards. Vision is supposed to sharpen over time. Language is supposed to mature. When nothing changes in how a story is told, it usually means the story is being used to cover a lack of movement. Real progress forces uncomfortable updates. It creates new problems that replace old excuses. Frozen narratives exist to avoid that discomfort. They keep everything familiar, predictable, safe. And the longer a narrative stays frozen, the harder it becomes to admit that it should have changed. This shift does not happen overnight. It happens quietly. At first, the leader is just the loudest voice for the mission. Then they become the face of it. Then they become inseparable from it. Eventually, criticizing the project feels like criticizing the person. That's when accountability gets blurry, because now progress creates a problem. If the mission succeeds without the leader at the center, what happens to the spotlight? So the project stays unfinished, always expanding, always building, always almost there. Not because it cannot be completed, but because completion would shift attention away from the brand. When a movement turns into a personal brand, momentum matters more than milestones. The goal becomes staying relevant, not arriving. That's when movements stop moving forward and start revolving around one identity.
Well, as I said, we finished. The renovations are done. We got to dot a couple I's and cross a couple T's, and then we have to go for inspection with the city of Wilmington, Delaware. We don't know what's going to happen with that because they never thought we would finish. Now that we're done, we now got to fight them. Because remember, they tried to sell the school behind our backs this past summer.
Oh, Lord. Again. Again. Nothing new, nothing changed, same old shit.
This part matters because it explains why debates around long timelines get emotional. Waiting for years is not passive. It's an investment of belief. Time becomes part of someone's identity. I've been here since the beginning stops being a statement and starts being a badge. So questioning outcomes feels personal. It feels like saying the wait was pointless, and nobody wants to sit with that thought. Defending the story becomes easier than confronting disappointment. Hope becomes something to protect, not examine. This is why the strongest defenders are usually the longest supporters. Not because they are blind, but because they are invested. Time raises the emotional cost of doubt. And that cost keeps people loyal longer than results ever could. That's why long timelines don't just test leaders. They test the people who believed. There comes a point where spreadsheets stop helping. Arguments get circular. Receipts get debated. But time does not debate. Time just accumulates. You can explain a delay for a year. You can even explain it for 3. After 10, the explanation becomes the story. That's when the calendar turns into evidence. Not evidence of intent. Evidence of outcome, because time measures what actually moved, not what was planned, not what was promised. That's why people eventually stop asking how much and start asking how long. 10 years is long enough for patterns to form, long enough for excuses to age, long enough for reality to speak without raising its voice. At that point, the calendar tells you more than any argument ever could.
We had a vacant property registration fee bill that we should not have even owed because as a nonprofit, you're supposed to get a 4-year waiver. They didn't give it to us, right? I called them up to see if we can come to some type of an agreement. If you're not going to give it to us, say that and let us pay.
Lucy, stop it! Denial is a river in Egypt.
After a decade, the question changes. It's no longer what's the plan or what went wrong. It becomes something quieter, something heavier. What exactly are we waiting for now? Not emotionally, structurally. What condition has not been met yet? What box is still unchecked? What moment are we circling? Because if the answer is vague, then the destination probably is too. 10 years removes the benefit of the doubt, not out of malice, out of clarity. It forces people to confront whether the delay is temporary or permanent by design. Here's the part people don't expect. 2016 felt urgent because the future was wide open. Anything still felt possible. 2026 feels heavy because possibility has a history now. You are no longer imagining outcomes. You are comparing expectations to memory. That's why this comparison hurts. Not because of failure, because of contrast. People are not upset that something took time. They are unsettled by how familiar everything still sounds. When 10 years pass and the language feels unchanged, it forces a realization nobody rushes toward, that maybe the waiting was not a phase. Maybe it was the structure. This is why I didn't want to argue numbers today, because money debates turn into teams. Receipts turn into noise, but time doesn't care who you're rooting for. Power isn't just about what you say. It's about how long you can keep saying it without the story changing. Culture rewards consistency, even when consistency turns into stagnation. And that's the part most people miss. Human beings are loyal to meaning, not outcomes. We defend stories because stories protect our identity, especially when we've invested years into believing them. So this wasn't about one person, it was about a pattern, about what happens when language outlives progress and waiting quietly becomes the system. Here's the real question I want to leave you with, and sit with it before you answer in the comments. At what point does patience stop being faith and start being the thing that keeps nothing from changing? And if you want the full picture, there's an almost 3-hour deep dive video that breaks down the school, the timelines, the statements, everything from start to finish. No rush, no edits, just the entire context laid out. I'll link it so you can watch it when you're ready. I'll see you on the next one.
Panda, 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 panda.
Panda out.